Trustee self-dealing is one of the most common claims we deal with in our trust litigation practice. Trustees have very broad powers of discretion in managing trust assets, and they sometimes make transactions that benefit themselves instead of the trust beneficiaries. This happens when a claim for breach of fiduciary duty for a trustee self-dealing may need to be filed in the civil court. Our experience on both sides of the aisle has taught us that trustee self-dealing is a surprisingly frequent, often misunderstood, and almost certainly underreported offense. We have seen many cases where a trustee genuinely didn't know they were engaging in a self-dealing transaction, and other cases where a trustee is accused of self-dealing even when their actions proved to be in the best interest of the beneficiaries. What is self-dealing in a trust? Self-dealing in a trust happens when a trustee uses trust assets for his or her benefit, usually to the detriment or potential detriment of the beneficiaries. The golden rule here being that a trustee is never to let their personal interests enter into any decision about how to manage trust property.
I propose this, but I don't care. I don't need a seconder. My own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this, pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass.
No representation is made that the quality of legal services to be performed are greater than the legal services provided by other lawyers. You found the Backstory Podcast, number 142, Ethical Action. I'm joined today by my client and partner in crime, Francis Paul Ripp. Also, journalist Brandon Mosley and former lobbyist, city councilman, county commissioner, and Steve, I don't quite know what you do right now, but former elected official Steve Nodine. And of course, I'm Harry Still. I'm an attorney here in Baldwin County, and we hope that we put together a new lineup for you that you guys enjoy. So, Mr. Ripp, tell us a little bit about why you're doing this.
All right. Paul Ripp with the Ripp Report. We also have Baldwin County Legal, working with Backstory Podcast, and also deal with the devil on a wrongful conviction.
All right. And
consumer affairs.
So, Mr. Nodine, tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing here today.
I'm not going to say a word after that exchange. I'm just Steve Nodine. That's all you need to know.
That's all I need to know. There you go. And
yeah, really.
So then Brandon,
I like how you did it, Harry, but that was very tactful. Nodine, former county commissioner of Mobile, Alabama, former city council member, spend a lot of time lobbying, a lot of time on talk radio, and a lot of time talking to this journalist, outstanding journalist, Mr. Brandon. It's the first time I've seen you in person in a long time.
So, Brandon, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do for a living.
I'm a journalist. I've been doing this now for we're going on 13 years now. I've been published over 10,000 times. I'm currently with altoday.com.
All right. So, and of course, I have numerous interests in, I was a candidate for Republican candidate for Attorney General in this last primary, and had it handed to me, wouldn't you say, boys? So,
yes.
All right.
Brought that up.
So the crux of our podcast today is about the Mabel Amos Memorial Scholarship Trust and the fact that the Alabama Ethics Commission Executive Director Tom Albritton is one of the trustees. And there's been a lot of reporting from various news organizations. But I think one of the things that people have left out in the backstory that we want to give everybody is just how powerful and influential this family is. So this is federal judge Harold Albritton. This is Tom's father. You can see he was a JAG officer. He practiced law in Andalusia from 62 to 91 when he was appointed to the bench. And, they're generational lawyers, and he's in the Alabama Lawyers Hall of Fame. It was the oldest law firm in continuous existence in the state of Alabama when it was closed by the 5th generation in 2015. And I guess that's when Tom took the job at the Ethics Commission. And there's a book written about it called The End of Nowhere, A History of the Albritton Law Firm in Andalusia, Alabama. And if you want to go download that and read that piece of scripture, go right ahead. The other thing is,
have a new chapter soon.
The Alabama State Bar has a pro bono award that they give out every year, the Harold Albritton Leadership Award, right? So that's to honor the most pro bono lawyer in Alabama each year. And then we have Benjamin Albritton. Anybody want to guess where he works? He is in the Consumer Affairs Division of the Attorney General's office. That's right. So let's talk a bit about the first female Secretary of State in Alabama was a lady named Mabel Amos. She was born in 1900 in Conecuh County, and she died at age 99. In 99, isn't that right? She was almost 100. So anyway, right. Ms. Mabel Amos had some land, a considerable tract of land that she set up, or it was specified in her will created a trust, and the property was to be managed by 3 trustees, 2 lawyers from Mr. Albritton's law firm, and a 3rd trustee that was a banker. And subsequently, it doesn't matter who the bank was, it got acquired by Regions. And all of the alleged malfeasance went on while Regions was one of the trustees. So anyway, this property sat there for many years, and they would cut the timber, and they would take the money from the timber sales and give away scholarships to needy children from Conecuh County, or at least that was their edict. I guess we should start in 2001 with this Lee Manning story. She is the grandniece of former Alabama Secretary of State Mabel Amos, and she is really upset that she was denied money to go to college when there's a multi-million-dollar charitable trust set up, right? So for many years,
that would have been her. That would have been her daughter. That's her daughter, Megan. Not Lee is the mother.
Right. So, yeah, but she is the grandniece, and then that would be her daughter. So there's a familiar connection there. What the Manning family didn't know, nor did anyone else, is that about 8 years ago, they sunk an oil well on the property, and $100 million worth of oil and gas has been extracted from the Mabel Amos property. And best I can tell, about 15% of that goes into the scholarship fund, right? So let's just say $12 to $15 million so far has gone into this trust. Members of Alabama former Secretary of State filed a lawsuit. A lawsuit filed against Regions Financial Corporation alleges the bank holding company mismanaged a charitable trust named for former Alabama Secretary of State, charging exorbitant fees and steering scholarship money to the children of the trust board members. Wow. So that's where we get into this. The reason we watched the video in the beginning talking about fiduciary responsibilities of trustees, and we'll get into a little bit more when we get in the rules of professional responsibility. But when you're a trustee, you have kind of carte blanche power, like being the executor of someone's estate, right? And so there's a heightened level of scrutiny, and that's something I think that's being glossed over. And of course, this is all he's all sideways with the Attorney General right now. Also, I think that's important to set the stage for the story. This is an advisory opinion from the Ethics Commission to themselves, saying they don't have to turn over exculpatory information because they're essentially the grand jury for elected officials. So lot of things going on up there. Of course, these are the commission members of the Ethics Commission, and you'll see former Chief Justice Lynn Stewart. There's isn't Cromwell a retired general?
Yes.
Anyway, they're all heavy hitters as far as resumes go, but I don't know why they would keep these people employed. So, Executive Director Tom Albritton, you see him there, and then Cynthia Ralston is that Special Assistant to the Director. Now, we need to back up just a second, and under this advisory opinion, after this advisory opinion was issued, the Attorney General comes over to the Ethics Commission, and he says, hey, I've looked at all this stuff, and I'm pretty sure that several people lied to the Ethics Commission during a hearing. And Cynthia Ralston here used to be general counsel for the Ethics Commission, and she was defrocked. She was actually an assistant attorney general assigned to them, and the attorney general clipped her wings. So instead of firing her, they made her special assistant to the director. And then you recognize Brian Patterson, don't you, Rip, from our hearing?
Yeah.
When we sued him over this, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, like, if I worked there, I wouldn't want my damn picture up here either, would you? I mean, I can't figure out why they can't get a picture of these
wouldn't
people
be
on
up
the
there.
website. And then you see here what I consider to be typical Alabama political action. So to their credit, the Lagniappe broke the story. Isn't that right, Paul? Rob Holbert at the
Yes,
Lagniappe?
they broke the story, and correct. And then we found Megan Carmack.
Okay, so here we get into the self-dealing. Ethics director's kids' tuition paid from trust he oversees. Tom Albritton is the state's policeman for conflict of interest and ethical breaches. Now, just think about that. He's the top cop, right? So then in September 2021, Rob writes another story. Alabama Ethics Commission Director Tom Albritton's children received an additional $15,000 in tuition payments from a charitable trust upon which he serves as a board member, bringing the total amount from the trust that paid his kids' tuition to $120,000. To add insult to injury, his children did not even go to school in Alabama. How about that?
Sacrilege.
Yeah.
Where'd they go, to Auburn?
Really? And
So I'd be remiss
Texas.
if we didn't. Yeah, Albritton serves as one of 3 directors of the Mabel Amos Memorial Fund, a charitable trust set up to provide scholarships for students in, that's not right, it's not Covington County, it's Conecuh County. The trust was created in the final will and testament of Amos, who served as personal secretary for 6 Alabama governors and was, boy, wouldn't you like to have an hour alone with her?
Listen,
I bet she knew more. So 6 governors and was state's first female secretary of state. Albritton's law firm created the will for the then 92-year-old Amos, placing 2 of its attorneys, Albritton and Rick Clifton, on the board, along with John Bell, a representative from Regions Bank, which manages the trust. That's right. And so a lawsuit filed regarding the Mabel Amos Memorial Trust alleges fraud and an illegal quid pro quo between Regions Bank and Alabama Ethics Director Albritton. So during this period of time when they received $12 million in revenue, guess how much money they've given away as of these stories? $3 million. That's it. More importantly, $1 million of it went to fees to Regions Bank.
Oh, of course.
Now,
I was going to say, Region Bank got $1 million of
Now,
it.
the first 8 years they managed the trust, they only charged them like $100,000, and then they struck oil, and now they've charged them $1 million in the last 6 or 7 years. So anyway, let me explain the quid pro quo. Okay, so the 3 of you are trustees for the Mabel Amos Trust. Brandon works for the bank. So when it's time for Brandon to get paid, Brandon abstains from voting, and the other 2 members approve the disbursement to Regions Bank. Conversely, when it was time for Albritton to get his money, he recused and let the other two. You see how everybody's getting something here?
It's been going on. This is just one example, and I can give you, and I'm going to go back with probate court and the power of probate courts within Alabama. And Brandon, you and I think probably talked about this at one time. I have a brother on a short track. I have a brother has a sizable trust. He's in Florida now. He has no dependents, nobody to leave the money to except for his brothers and all. And in Florida, my little sister takes care of this trust, and it's a full-time job because the state of Florida has so many things that you have to overcome on these conflict of interest and being able to be a trustee any type of event like this. And what has occurred in Alabama, and I never thought about this up until I got elected to county commissioner, because the probate court comes under the county. And I realized the huge conflict, what was going on between mental health, that was Alta Point, and Judge Davis, who is now going to retire. And it was a war. And I was wondering what this war was about. And because of things, Miss Mabel, by the way, when I moved up here in 94 or something, I mean, the history of this terrific person, first and foremost, is extraordinary. And Brandon, he knows a lot about it too. But first of all, it's extraordinary that this person did what she did to help Conecuh County students. Okay. There's only a certain amount of people in Conecuh County.
13,600.
There's only a certain amount of them going to college. So you could figure this rocket scientist out. But this is what has occurred. And these ethics laws that we have established here in Alabama are a joke. They've been a joke. This is one example of thousands within this state that have the same situation going on, not as big, right? Could be $100,000, $200,000. And this is what they put the families through. You would think this young lady that wanted to go to school, her grandmother set up this trust to do one thing: education. It's a no-brainer. But what we get is politics involved in everything. Probate court, ethics commissions, people, what they do is they are just as bad as the bar association. They cover for each other all the way down the road. Every one of them. And the people who make money, the lawyers and the banks. Plain and simple.
So I want to read.
Amen.
I want to read the torpedoes.
This was not a shocking story. When I read the story, and Holbert, this is the problem that we have. The media doesn't continue. We don't have the people that used to monitor and be a watchdog in the media anymore. It's dependent on people like y'all and Backstory podcast and Rip Report. That's who it's dependent on. We used to have a media that this would have been the biggest story. Brandon, tell me if I'm wrong. This would have been probably one of the biggest stories in Alabama.
Well, it's kind of hard to
my question to Brandon is, how come it isn't?
Well, the number of people that are reporters in Alabama has dramatically decreased over the last 12 years. I have more former colleagues than I do current colleagues. Holding companies out of state bought up the newspapers. And then when we went to the internet, their response was to, okay, we're losing advertising dollars. We'll cut content creators. And so now you have a lot fewer reporters. And so one of the first positions that got eliminated was that investigative reporter who, spent 40, 80, 120 articles, hours
Yes.
to do one story. You know, if your goal is to produce content, someone that like me that's more of a ham and egg news journalist that puts out 15 to 20 to 25 articles a week, those are the kind of people that stayed, and the old-fashioned investigative reporters,
Gone.
they've been gone. So somebody who can go out and, you know, spend the time to read all these, you know, reports and talk to the witnesses and do all the legwork. There are very few editors that are going to allow a reporter to spend that kind of time, because that means you're not covering the breaking news of what Congress and the state legislature are doing, or just who got murdered last week in Mobile.
Right. And there's plenty of that. So I wanted to read this Damn the Torpedoes just briefly, Rob Holbert's editorial. If I had to bake an Alabama corruption cake, the recipe would probably go something like this: 2 parts shiftless opportunists, 2 parts complicit appointed boards and agencies, 1 part disinterested attorney general's office, 1 part ineffective ethics commission, and 2 pinches of one-party rule. Blend thoroughly, bake for 200 years, and ice generously with inept and partisan press coverage. Serves 5 million. Maybe the cake ought to be served with a nice scoop of public indifference as well. Regardless of how it's plated, we're eating piles of it on a routine basis. The latest example is what's taken place at the Alabama State Bar over the past few years. This is the state agency that regulates the state lawyers and oversees their licensure. It's been a real shit show. So what's he talking about going on at the state bar? Philip McCallum, executive director, resigned October 23rd, 2022, a little over a month before he would be found guilty of 17 violations of the state ethics laws. It went nearly unnoticed across the state.
17.
The Alabama State Bar's electronic newsletter, The Scoop, noted the departure, lauding his 3 years of service and pledging to continue the positive trajectory Philip began us on.
It's pretty strong.
I mean, what in the world? Okay, and the kicker here, he was fined $100,000. Has anybody ever heard of a $100,000 fine from the Ethics Commission? Well, to avoid an indictment, right?
Well, that's what he paid to avoid. Again, you're talking to a guy who was. I had in ethics. I was found how I was in my case for driving my county truck. I could drive my county truck from here to California if I wanted to, and the Ethics Commission never once filed anything against me ever. It was all Baldwin County Court. So this is what they utilized. They utilized these laws to selective prosecution on certain people. Okay.
Sure.
Now, the deal is, I don't have too many rights because of my background to sit there and talk about ethics. But I remember one thing that was taught to us. We go to county commission school, unfortunately, at that Auburn University. No disrespect to y'all and you War Eagles. But the deal is, we go to county commission school. You know this, Harry. And I remember the most important thing I ever learned is, if it feels wrong, it is wrong.
Certainly.
These folks have no clue about what feels wrong anymore. Am I right, Brandon? They don't have any feeling.
Yeah.
Shameless.
You know, the general deal is, can I be caught? And if I am caught, will anybody investigate? And 9 times out of 10, the answer to that is no. Probably on both counts.
Mm-hmm.
So another little backstory issue. So the former director and Birmingham attorney, Philip McCallum, do you know who his father was?
I'm going to take a wild guess.
the director of UAB, the guy who took it from a sleepy little hospital to the cutting edge medical mecca of the South.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we're talking pedigree, that seems to have more to do with whether you get indicted than what you actually did.
If you would have told me 20 years ago, if you would have asked me that 20 years ago, I'd say, I grew up poor, and I did, and my mother showered us with love. So I grew up. So I would never fault somebody for that, and nor would I, even in politics. We talk about this, and I know what Rip does and all. I'm going to say 95% of politicians try to do the right thing. Okay, 95%. I know that's a high number, and you may not look at it that way, but I bet so many good politicians that try to do the right thing, but then they get caught up in people trying to make them do the wrong thing. Miss Mabel's trust is exactly that. What we get is people that influence these other people to corrupt a system that's supposed to be the checks and balances on everyone. And there's nobody. If Rob, now this is Rob, and give Rob the Holbert credit for even doing that story. But how many more stories like Brandon is talking about? Is how many more stories we're going to hear about it? How many do you think? Zero. We won't hear.
It's already winding down.
Yeah, I mean, we won't hear anything from a TV station. We talked about newspapers. The television and radio, talk radio, which I grew up with here in WABB and WNTM here with Uncle Henry and all. We grew up, we would take these stories and keep going for weeks at a time until something was done about it. Now we hit it and we quit it, and that's it. That's all it has. We go to the next.
Well, I got something scary to tell y'all about. So I was interested in becoming a lobbyist, or at least the process of becoming a lobbyist. And so I called up there and I said, hey, what exactly do I need to do? Well, you need to send a rep letter and a letter from the principal. And then within 2 months, you have to attend lobbyist training, but you can do it online. So I went and live streamed this thing last summer or summer before. Guess who's doing the lobbyist training in the state of Alabama? The director of the Ethics Commission.
Can't make this up.
Yeah. He's up there telling the lobbyists what ethics are.
Because he's the director of ethics. So he also gave the training to the state legislators, because that's what the director of ethics does for the state of Alabama.
So is that every year that he does it, or is it just for the freshmen coming in?
I know they do it at the start of every quadrennial.
So Paul, Mr. Rip, on his Rip report, did this dirty underwear. So the Attorney General, Ethics Commission, and Alabama Bar all wear the same dirty underwear. They protect one another and politicians from pesky political complaints and play legal shuffle that results in whitewashing their culpability. It's perfectly clear that the Attorney General will always side with the bar or ethics. The bar and ethics depend on the Attorney General to cover their back.
That's the gospel right there, Rip. That's the truth.
Yeah, and what unnerves Harry a little bit is when I explain in layman's term that Mr. Albritton, the executive director, is stealing money from children that were supposed to get it for scholarships that needed the money but had the good grades, and giving it to his kids who are not in need of the money and didn't even go to school in the state. It is the most, I cannot understand how anyone in Montgomery can allow this to keep going. I mean, it's preposterous. It's totally ridiculous what's going on with him.
Okay, so
and now you have another lawsuit. You have the first lawsuit by Mr. Gallion. Then you had the Attorney General that chimed in and jumped in. And now you have Mr. Byron Matthews, who is going to be, who's representing the school kids of Connecticut County. Thank God. Glad to see that one coming. And he's going directly after the trustees and naming them. He doesn't seem to be have any connection to the Albritons that would worry him. So I'm putting
he lives in
money
Florida
on him for the lawsuit.
So the Alabama rules,
he has an office in Tallahassee and New York City.
So the Alabama Rules of Professional Conduct, maintaining the integrity of the profession, Rule 8.4, and it defines what misconduct is. It is professional misconduct for a lawyer to see if this sounds familiar in the quid pro quo thing. Violate or attempt to violate the rules of professional conduct, knowingly assist or induce another to do so, or to do so through the acts of another, right? So B, commit a criminal act that reflects adversely on the lawyer's honesty, trustworthiness, or fitness as a lawyer and represent in other respects. Engage in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. Engage in conduct that is prejudicial to the administration of justice. State or imply an ability to influence improperly a governmental agency or official. Knowingly assist. Anyway, need I go on? Need I go on? These are the rules of professional conduct. Oh, and by the way, I guess everybody caught that Mr. Albritton's a lawyer, right? And he's, regardless of what the Attorney General does or the Ethics Commission keeps him on, the Alabama State Bar is supposed to hold him to account for his conduct, right?
They will never will.
And he's received some of the money while he was in office as a director. And tell him what he didn't have to fill out.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. The 2018 Code of Alabama, Title 19, Fiduciaries and Trust. If you want to take a deep dive into this, that is the code section, and you can go check it out. And do you remember Ms. Amos, the only provision that she put in her trust is a reflection of this statute here. And it says, essentially it defines what self-dealing is under this IRS code section 4947A2, right? And that this is the applicable statute that if anyone were interested in going after Mr. Albritton, that's what they would do. And then here we have in general what's the definition of self-dealing, and what a disqualified person is. And of course, you're a disqualified person if you're one of the trustees, right? I mean, it seems so monumentally simple. Monumentally simple. So, yeah.
God.
So Alabama Supreme Court just toe tagged your rights. Do you care? The Open Records Act, Ethics Commission. Oh, here we go. Here's the Marshall connection and another piece of the backstory that you need to know. So Steve Marshall, when he ran for Attorney General in 2018 against Troy King,
you jumped over the other one.
He shoplifted $750,000 of illegal pack-to-pack transfers into the state of Alabama from a pack outside of Alabama, which is against the law. Because it's campaign finance laws, the Ethics Commission takes it up, right? So guess what the Ethics Commission determined? There wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So
they always do.
In the midst of all of this, Mr. Rip filed a lawsuit against the Alabama Ethics Commission. Were y'all aware? I'm sure Brandon knew about it. I don't know if you know about this, No Nine, but in 2021, I was Mr. Rip's attorney, and we filed a writ of mandamus. And we weren't asking for the Ethics Commission to re-review these things and find anybody guilty. We just wanted them to re-review them with Mr. Albritton not being involved, right? Because he obviously doesn't know what ethics are. You follow?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and so then the three cases that we point to are the Fairhope Airport Authority, board members Jack Burrell and Ray Hicks in a real estate scheme to lease one of these board members some property at the Fairhope Municipal Airport. The next one is North Baldwin Utilities board member and mayor Robert A. Bob Wills of Bay Minette and board member James Robertson related to the purchase of 2 houses at Steelwood Country Club from a trust where Mr. Robertson serves as a trustee and Mayor Bob Wills is a beneficiary. Now, he's not only the mayor of Bay Minette, he's also an attorney. The trust was established by the mayor's father-in-law. And then the third one is Fairhope City Councilman Robert Brown related to a no-bid contract for the Eastern Shore Arts Center where he serves as board liaison to the city council. If not for his position, he'd have never been on the Arts Council nor been able to or have the inside knowledge to apply for that. So anyway, and there's a there's a little action. Then they filed a motion to dismiss. Now, guess what the crux of their motion to dismiss was? That we didn't
Have standing?
We didn't sue on behalf of the state of Alabama. And you
that
see
would have been conflict.
and you see here Cynthia Probst Ralston, General Counsel, Alabama Ethics Commission. She's an assistant attorney general, right? So initially, Mr. Rip filed a bar complaint, and we obviously aren't going to, because of my obligations, I don't feel like we need to show that, but we do have it, and the response was weak. Would you say, Mr. Rip? They basically just said, this guy doesn't have any grounds to bring this action. He's just a blogger looking for clicks, right? That's literally how he responded.
Weak.
Yeah. So anyway, they filed a motion to dismiss.
Most of the time they won't.
Sir?
Yeah, we've had the Attorney General, Ethics, and the Bar Association not even reply to letters.
So it's during this time that Mr. Rip and I pick up the phone and conference call the Ethics Commission. And so a writ of mandamus is an extraordinary writ, and they're usually heard very quickly. In this case, our judge had a conflict, and we ended up Judge Hartigan ended up recusing himself, and we got Judge Gaines. So anyway, back when he filed his bar complaint, I want to say was the first time you inquired with the Ethics Commission about the form that and Steve, you'll remember these. Do you remember having to fill out your statement of economic interest every year?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And you had to tell them how much money you owed on your mortgage and what kind of assets you had. I think that sprung from somebody paid George Wallace's mortgage off back in the day. So anyway, Paul says, hey, there's all this question about whether or not Albritton disclosed whether he was on this scholarship board or not when he was hired. And Ms. Ralston tells us Tom doesn't have to fill out a statement of economic interest. And I'm sitting here scratching my head, and I'm like, wait a minute. The most bribable individual in the most corrupt state in the union? Now, a bus driver for the school board has to fill out as SEOI, but the head of the Ethics Commission doesn't have to? That doesn't seem right. So guess what? It turns out it wasn't right. That he did, in fact, fill out a statement of economic interest, and he failed to disclose that he was on this board. Now, don't you think that would have completely changed our argument and our response to motion to dismiss? Of course it would. But you got to remember, this wasn't an omission, was it, Paul? She straight up told us.
He just forgot about that. He forgot about that 120.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, man. Well, anyway, the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that the Alabama State Bar actually sits right here up under the Alabama Supreme Court. The Supreme Court controls what the rules are and who works at the state bar. They hire everybody, or at least the executive director and general counsel and the heavy hitter positions. And then, it's kind of a who's who over there too, if you know what I mean. So, between Alicourt, Fairhope, the
Alicourt, back up. Who created Alicourt?
That would be the jug pisser, our former Lieutenant Governor Steve Wyndham. And so
you got to remember.
I'm sorry.
You always got to remember include those things, and when you talk to people, particularly on the podcast like that, because that's crucially important.
I agree. So Holbert, Rob Holbert of the Lagniappe went asking after the contract, right? And guess what the Supreme Court told him? Under the Patriot Act, this contract is critical infrastructure and doesn't have to be disclosed. That's right. That's the kind of state we live in. So I want to talk a little bit about some other ethical issues. And Brandon, I know you covered this ad nauseum. The Hubbard tapes. So Paul Hubbard Mike Hubbard was our, I keep doing that. I'm stuck in 2000. So Mike Hubbard is the Speaker of the House.
No, I'm just laughing at the whole damn thing.
So Mike Hubbard is the Speaker of the House, and in 2011 they passed ethics reform. Is that, Brandon? Is that right?
Actually, the Republicans were elected in 2010. Robert Bentley was elected, in that same election, but Bob Riley was the outgoing governor. And he and Mike Hubbard did not fully trust Robert Bentley. So as soon as those, the legislators, we're getting down in the weeds.
Right.
But the new governor is sworn in and inaugurated in January, the middle of January. And the legislators are, the new legislators take their oath of office typically at the end of November. So Bob Riley called a special session at the end of November, the 1st of December, 2010. So that's when the ethics law passed, was in that 2010 special session, not in the regular session, and before Robert Bentley became governor.
But just let me remind everybody that, and I was very close to Bob Riley, and supported him greatly. Bob Riley then became, within an ethics package, he became the lobbyist for Airbus. Let me write. ThyssenKrupp. I go on.
Now the Riley, Mike Hubbard.
I love me some Bob and Patsy Riley. Don't get me wrong.
Bob Riley and Mike Hubbard,
reason for that to be passed.
Ethics package brought a whole different layer of accountability to the state that we didn't have before. Everything Mike Hubbard got convicted of had to do with his own ethics
bill. Yes.
Previous speakers of the House did what Mike Hubbard did, where they had contracts with people that had business for the legislature, and that was normal. In fact, you would give the Speaker of the House a consulting contract if you wanted something moved before the legislature.
Yeah, Steph Hammett being one of them.
Jeez.
Yeah. I mean, we're not throwing stones at Steph. He was following Steph. He's following the rules.
Where was Steph from?
Andalusia.
Huh. Isn't that a shocker? Y'all starting to figure this out, huh?
Well, there's a lot going on in Marshall County and Tuscaloosa, too. East Coast, West Coast kind of thing. But anyway, after Hubbard is put in jail, it turns out that he's burning the phones up trying to talk to anybody he can in the legislature to change the law so that what he did is no longer illegal.
Yes, he tried to get the legislature to pass legislation changing his own ethics law that he passed in 2010 to, make it where what he did in 2011, 2012 and got convicted of in 2016 was actually illegal, now legal.
Hey, y'all couldn't write this story. I mean, I go back to what I've been through, but y'all can't write this. You can't write a story like this.
It's too crazy. It's almost unbelievable.
No,
so
you can't. And the present
but
the current situation is a joke.
So when the Attorney General finally turns over the transcripts of these hours and hours of telephone conversations that were recorded between Mike Hubbard and all these people in the legislature, they're all redacted. Why would that be? Somebody interested in the administration of justice.
Yeah, COVID.
Yeah, we had to redact them because of COVID. That sounds good. So I have a proposal. I call it the John Teague, Randy Davis, Mike Hubbard. I keep doing that, man. I don't know what is wrong with my brain.
That's a good enough excuse.
So the
Paul Hubbard
Anti-Revolving Door Act. If you're removed or arrested and charged with bribery of a public official, you can no longer be a lobbyist in the state of Alabama. Do you guys remember this conversation that you had in 2014? Nodine, you were the person speaking out, and Brandon, you were the reporter.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that story, Brandon.
Yeah, in I want to say 2016, I think, don't quote me exactly on this, I think Isaac Horton, who's no longer in the legislature, introduced legislation following Mike Hubbard's conviction where anyone who was had a felony conviction could not become a registered lobbyist in the state of Alabama, although it grandfathered in people that, already were registered lobbyists who'd previously been convicted. That bill went nowhere.
Then, of course, you see Mr. Hubbard gets his sentence almost cut in half. Now, this is one that I need to be careful about because he was never convicted, but Representative Randy Davis indicted on bribery charges. This was in 2018. Representative Randy Davis, Republican of Daphne, was indicted Wednesday on charges of conspiracy and bribery over what prosecutors describe as an attempt to pressure Blue Cross Blue Shield to cover insulin therapies offered in health clinics, in which I guess that all kind of blew up. And I don't know if he's turned states or what, but he was supposed to be running for probate judge here and bowed out when these indictments came out. Does everybody remember him announcing he was going to run for probate?
I remember he left the legislature, and I know Mr. Davis well. Even if the Horton legislation had passed, it's my understanding of that case that would not apply to Davis. I apologize if I'm wrong on this, because he was never actually convicted of anything. I mean, being indicted is simply an accusation by the state. You're not actually guilty. I think Stephen knows a little bit about this.
Yeah.
Just because, just because they accuse you or indict you for something doesn't necessarily mean you're guilty of anything.
Okay, well, but not knowing. Listen, if nobody else went to jail, that'd be one thing. But several people went to jail over this, and he came out unscathed. But not Davis. And that's what I'm saying. Listen, if he turned states and slipped the noose, that's different than if it turned. They took it to a grand jury, they got an indictment, and then between the indictment and trial, they decide to drop the charges. I don't see the feds doing that often at all.
Under
No.
under the American system of jurisprudence, if a jury of your peers finds you not guilty, or you're never found guilty by a jury because it didn't get to a jury, you're presumed to be innocent. So whatever happened with Randy Davis,
I knew Randy Davis for a long time. I could never in my life. Y'all may disagree with me. Just a fine man, fine family. I have never had, and I don't say that about too many people in politics, but when that came down, I was just as shocked, and I forgot who I was talking to at the time. And I don't think it was a matter of state's evidence he turned. I think it was a matter of the federal government doing everything they can, just like they did in my case, is to throw spaghetti up on the wall to see who they could get.
Okay,
well, in that case, and in the Jack Williams case up in Jefferson County, I kind of think they brought a bunch of stuff to, their grand jury and got indictments trying to put pressure on people to do a state's evidence deal and tell what they know and plead to this or plead to that. I don't want to accuse federal prosecutors of acting improperly, but that has a lot of.
They do. I will.
No comment.
Aggressive, what was called aggressive.
And there's also
selective. It's called selective prosecution, and this is what.
There's also a lot to be said about these secret.
You talking about grand juries, Paul?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the grand juries. I've always, you talk about selected. There's just reform that needs. We talked about this last time.
Yes, the secret
places. The two places that seriously need reform, if you're going to just get back to the ethics situation and all that, obviously making grand juries open. That's the first thing you should do. I don't care what anybody says about protecting people. You can talk. And holding prosecutors accountable for both what they don't do and what they do that circumvents the law or ethics violations. That's where it all comes down to. We've allowed these people we've created this trough. We could talk about this all day long, but look, we, the people, are the ones that created this. You talk about Republicans being accountability and great. I think we've had a supermajority for how long, Brandon, in the state legislature?
Since November, the end of November 2010.
That's 13.
Everything. The governor
have done nothing. They've done nothing to make it, like you said, Harry, and Rip. You shake your heads about it and say, well, it's up to us to sit there and tell these people this is our priority. This is just this case of Miss Mabel and Miss Mabel Amos and her situation. Like I tell you, it's just one of so many across the state, and it affects. This is a large trust. There's families out there that, as you know, Harry, that they deal with on each probate court, the ability of getting their family's land sold, et cetera, et cetera. And the only people that make money are the lawyers and the banks.
That's right.
Period.
Well, I'm glad you feel warm and fuzzy about Randy Davis, because not only did he slip the noose, but he's a registered lobbyist. And according to his disclosure, he represents Columbia Southern Infirmary Health, M&R Solutions, LLC. And the one that's not on here that I think you'll find interesting, Mr. Rip, is that he is now the registered lobbyist for the Baldwin County Commission. Now, this is the same commission that just provided office space to these legislators, and they hire staff to work for them, but they need their own lobbyist to walk across the hall and talk to them and tell them what they need.
Well, the same thing as Beth Lyons.
And they're renting it.
Beth Lyons in Mobile
and
was the same situation. And when I finally got the votes to fire her, and it was a crap storm from everybody thought we could not live without Beth Marion Lyons as our, and of course, Jimmy Lyons was her husband. There were so many conflicts. She represented the city and the county. Well, damn it, I got things that I don't want the county to be doing or the city to be doing at the time. There's huge conflicts. So, Randy getting those jobs. Listen, there's nothing better than somebody that used to be in under indictment from the federal prosecutor than being a lobbyist in Alabama.
I think it's a career track.
And that's a perfect. I think that's the way you ought to go. What the hell we're trying to get them now? That's the guy we need.
Under current law, there's nothing to prevent Mike Hubbard, who's been convicted, of becoming a licensed lobbyist and then go back and lobby the same legislature he used to be the Speaker of the House of.
All right, so I'm gonna tell y'all a little backstory. So in '99, I was working for the city of Gulf Shores, and I wrote an industrial access road and bridge grant for the Jack Edwards Airport Industrial Park. We did not receive the grant. A year later, we hired former state Senator John Teague to be our lobbyist, and apparently he took our money. And let me see if it doesn't say down here. He declined to comment as he left the board's hearing room. Teague pleaded guilty in 2002 to underpayment of federal income taxes. He was indicted along with former state transportation director Jimmy Butts, who was in charge of that money, the transportation money, and lobbyist Johnny Moore. Prosecutors said the three men were involved in a scheme where Moore and Teague lined up consulting contracts with cities and others seeking Butts' approval of highway projects and grants. And this was all, they were funding Jimmy Butts' son's NASCAR team or Bush League or whatever it is. Yeah. So that's John Teague. Now, later on, about 15 years later, when I was county manager, I went down to the legislature to talk to one of our state senators, and we were engaged in a conversation, and he goes, "Oh, 1 second, there's somebody I've got to talk to." And he goes over here and he starts talking to John Teague. Well, I thought that sumbitch was making big rocks into little rocks. And I almost had a heart attack when I found out he was a lobbyist. Yeah. So he's been at it all these years since, and there he is, venerable Montgomery lobbyist. Walked out of federal prison camp at Maxwell Air Force Base after serving 6 months for charges stemming from a federal corruption case in which bribes were funneled to former Alabama Transportation Director Jimmy Butts, in part supporting his son's NASCAR racing team.
Well, let's not, once again, there's things we can't fault people for here in Alabama now.
Right. And so you see Mr. Teague's client list.
NASCAR, not the NBA.
So anyway, we've got these other little issues going on down here, but I thought that we would take advantage of Brandon's brain and exploit it all we can while we have him with us. And Brandon, I thought we might talk a little bit about what's obviously I did not see any pre-filed bills related to ethics. Am I right about that?
I went through all 36 bills off the top of my head. There may have been one I missed. I don't remember any directly related to ethics. Now, there is some to increase state legislatures' oversight of things like the Pardons and Paroles Bureau. But up to 36, and again, there's probably going to be 1,200 bills filed. Only 36 were up as of last night. But ethics has not been a high priority.
So one, and this is your writing here that we're looking at. House Bill 1 is sponsored by State Representative Matt Simpson, and he's one of our legislators. As a matter of fact, he is the chairman of the House Ethics and Campaign Finance Committee. Obviously not interested in ethics or campaign finance, but he's saying that our drug trafficking bills are weak And as introduced, House Bill 1 would make the sale, manufacture, and possession of 1 gram or more of fentanyl trafficking under Alabama law. The penalty,
See, what they did was the trafficking law is years old, and when they spell out, marijuana trafficking, how much? I think if you're caught with over 1,000 pounds of marijuana, it's a mandatory minimum of like a life sentence, and each different drug has a different weight that triggers, the various penalties, 3 years, 15 years, 25 years, or life. And when these laws were written, fentanyl wasn't something that we talked about. It wasn't really being trafficked. Now it's the number one killer of people in overdoses. So what Simpson's doing is going back in and writing fentanyl into that statute.
Well, that's good. I mean, even though I don't have too many good things to say about him, but that's an outstanding piece of legislation. That's unbelievable what's happening in today's society. So I applaud him.
107,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in 2021.
Who gives a shit? In 2017, 200,000 died of opioid overdoses. All we've done is shift the drug of choice, man.
I could agree to that. Well, it's going to be like crack cocaine, Harry. You're right. I mean, what we're going to do is change these sentences, and it's just going to move on to a different drug. And the next thing you know, I've always believed in some form of decriminalization, and not, people say the hard drugs, this drug, that drug. Until the federal government, and I don't want them taking any more. You might have saw that Quinn Hillier wrote again about my gun case, where somebody with 27 years of service to his country and community like myself goes to federal prison for a year for smoking a joint. And now we can't get these
whilst in possession of a handgun. Now, let's not forget that the sheriff gave you a handgun for your own protection, not knowing that you were a reefer addict, man.
Yeah. I mean, the deal is I never thought about it, but that sole purpose of taking away the most valuable constitutional right you have, your Second Amendment right, and predicated on smoking a joint is just extraordinary. So even though this fentanyl is killing everybody and they're lacing everything with it, I think I applaud Matt Simpson for doing that, but I also understand your position also, Harry, is like, what the hell? We've gone from
what's going to be next, Matt? I mean, people are going to start eating ivory soap and shit to get high, and then we'll outlaw ivory soap.
Yep. Yeah.
A lot of the people that are drug overdosing on fentanyl
don't know they're taking it.
Know they were buying fentanyl.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is people, for whatever reason, trust their local drug dealer, which they probably shouldn't. So they go out and buy marijuana, or they buy opium, or cocaine, or heroin even. And the fentanyl's cheaper than any of that on the street. And so you'll lace it so to make it, a little bit of fentanyl in there produces a whole lot of high. And so somebody who's got a cocaine problem, and he goes out and he gets cocaine, if he uses the same amount of cocaine that he uses normally, but a corrupt drug dealer, and by the very nature, all drug dealers are corrupt, he buys cocaine that's 10% fentanyl, there's a good chance that cocaine addict may have died.
OD.
Yeah, he may have OD'd, and he had no idea what he was doing.
Yeah.
Well,
again, I mean, that's why, if you're going to look at decriminalization of certain drugs, that thing, people need to start understanding that, there's a way to do it. There's a way to help these people who are addicted, as I was at one point, and then you have to mix that in with what society is going through.
Well, the war on drugs is over, and drugs won. I'll announce that if nobody else will. I mean, it's just like this abortion law thing that our attorney general is proposing, right? We're gonna make it a crime for a woman to take the morning after pill. Well, just what kind of a police state apparatus are you gonna need to enforce that law?
Can you imagine?
Yeah, and it's the same kind of horse shit that Matt Simpson envisions, so that when we do catch somebody with like Brandon said, hell, I didn't know there was fentanyl in this. I bought a Lortab off my local drug dealer. Well, now, because you had 12 of them, it's trafficking, and you're going to go to prison for 25 years.
Yeah.
Don't really think that's what we're getting at
back
here.
From Matt. He's a dumbass.
Well, no, he's really smart, but he's a company man, right? He's following the GOP script.
Yeah, I know. Well, look, I've been this for an hour and 20, and it's Mardi Gras here in Mobile, and we got a lot of things to get prepared for tonight. So I wish you all a happy Mardi Gras. I hope y'all in Baldwin County keep your ass out of that Pokal. Don't go down to the Hushkow, as they call it in Russia. And stay safe, my friends.
All right. Well, we're going to keep going here.
Same
Steve,
to you, Steve.
Thanks for your time, man. We appreciate you.
All right, Rip.
Time.
All right, Brandon, tell me about Senate Bill 12. Would make Law Enforcement Memorial Day, which is celebrated on the first Friday in May of each year, a state holiday. The bill was sponsored by State Senator Will Barfoot and Russell Bedsoe.
Yeah, there's a House bill and a Senate bill, and they both do the same thing. It basically creates a new state holiday, and it would be, Memorial Day for the law enforcement officers who died in the line of duty here in the state.
So, Brandon, what do you think about this fiction that there's this gladiatorial class of citizen that protects the rest of us from all the mayhem in the world, and they should be given special dispensation like their own Memorial Day, and I don't know, they're the only ones that can drive around with tinted windows, and who knows what else we're going to come up with next. But they're not soldiers. They do a hard job. They deserve our respect. They are part. I couldn't do what I do without law enforcement. You do realize like a third of the sheriff's deputies, all they do is serve civil paper, right? I mean, every order that comes out of the court system, it goes to the clerk's office and it gets served by a sheriff's deputy. So they are integral to the
laying bricks hard too.
Well, that's true. And so, anyway, I think all this hero worship of law enforcement that's happened since 9/11 is folly. They're people. They are our fellow citizens, and they deserve our respect. But a law enforcement Memorial Day is dystopian in my mind.
Well, and the state already has Jefferson Davis's birthday and Confederate Memorial Day and Robert E. Lee Day as state holidays. So, a state holiday honoring.
What's one more?
Yeah, there'd be another day. I mean, it doesn't say it in the legislation, but you could replace Jefferson Davis Day in June, where all the state workers are off, and just move it here to May and celebrate, honor our fallen law enforcement officers. And it'll be a net effect of like nothing for the state.
Except psychologically for me and other people who think all this hero worship's a bunch of bullshit.
But the problem we're running into now is it's not like it was 10 and 20 years ago. it's difficult to recruit people who want to be law enforcement officers.
Yeah, but listen, the reason we have a Memorial Day for veterans and Veterans Day and that kind of thing is because we ask you to put your life on the line for us. And if you die, we're going to build a big statue to you, and we're always going to remember the sacrifice that you made. These guys aren't soldiers.
But they can get killed doing what they do.
Shit, so can't garbage men, I bet, die at higher rates than law enforcement officers. You want to bet me on it?
Well, I mean, here in Moody, Alabama, where I live, in, I want to say, 1998.
Mario Santobi.
Yeah, Mario Santobi.
I was there for his execution. He escaped from
Etowah
County Jail.
You know, anybody that was in Moody at the time knew that, you know, there, if you go down in front of the city hall in the city park, was 45 miles an hour, and then it drops to like 25 miles an hour. And if back then, if you didn't know to drop your speed limit, there'd be a police car pull you over. That was just a routine deal, and they gave a lot of speeding tickets there. And poor Officer Turner just pulled two guys over for speeding. They got out of the car and opened fire on them. They were escaped inmates from Mississippi. And then, let's say, year before last, you know, an officer here, you know, they had people that were making noise and acting up in the motel room, you know, a mile from my house. And they got a call at like 1 o'clock in the morning. Hey, these guys got loud noise and making, you know, a bunch of crap. So they called the police, and they had the police go knock on the door and say, hey, guys, I opened that door, and, you know, that officer got shot, I think, with a shotgun right in the face. Those are the two officers I knew personally. Well, I didn't know Turner personally. But now he did, you know, my mother was there when he was sworn in. You know, both of them died in the line of duty, and that can happen suddenly. And that's why there's a police officer's, you know, memorial. I kind of wish nobody died, you know, enforcing the laws, but they do, and we honor them. And I mean, I sort of object to having another state holiday, given that you're paying employees not to do anything. But I don't necessarily object to the motivation behind making that one of our state holidays.
I do, and I also object to giving them armored personnel carriers and automatic weapons. You and I are going to agree to disagree.
Yeah, I'm going to have to bow out here a minute. I've got some service people drove up here, and I didn't even know I had an appointment. So let me see what's going on.
Okay, we're going to keep going to House Bill 4.
And I appreciate Brandon. Like get with you later on, Brandon.
Okay.
All right, man. Is he gone yet? And then there were two. All right, Mr. Mosley. So this is my favorite bill of the season. Do you want to do House Bill 4?
Okay. Yeah, you know, employees to have their employees microchip. We're going to make it illegal for your employer to tell all your employees, guys, I need y'all microchipped so I know where y'all are at the factory every day. I can kind of see from an employer standpoint how this would be cool. You know, it's like,
or from the government's perspective,
I can figure out how many people were at the how much time that, you know, my employee Harry spent in the break room or in the bathroom or outside smoking a cigarette, because I have them all microchipped and I get microchip monitors all over the deal. Prince Chestnut and Representative Lawrence and a couple others, Democrats, have sponsored a bill to make it a felony for an employer to make that demand of its employees.
not actually having to chip them, but just making the demand is a class D felony.
Yeah, the felony would be requiring your employees to be microchipped.
Okay, so the next one I really don't understand. House Bill 24 would ban persons from loitering on a public roadway or in the right-of-way of a public roadway.
If you go to Montgomery, at pretty much every traffic light or stop sign, there's a dirty man with a sign who needs $10 to get home to his family in San Antonio.
Of course they do.
Or needs lunch or is hungry.
It's like
or
all the strippers in law school.
Or whatever. There was a attempt to make panhandling, by the Montgomery City Council, to make panhandling a violation of Montgomery City ordinance. That was defeated in the Montgomery City Council, but apparently the proponents of that went to their state representative, Reed Ingram, and said, let's just do that statewide, and pass a state law that says if I'm standing in the roadway, just, in the roadway or on the right of way, which would pretty much mean the sidewalk, if you have sidewalks in your town, would just standing there, dorking around, that would become a misdemeanor, and you could be arrested for, criminal loitering.
And also the legislation would ban fishing from bridges.
Yeah, you can't. That was an interesting little deal. If you read down deep in the bill that I don't quite understand, it's like, now fishing from a bridge would be banned unless the organization or the city or the county or the state that has supervision of that bridge allows fishing from the bridge.
Yeah, this is all just, we're going to legislate our way into utopia, right? So
I kind of wish the dirty little man at the stop sign would get his act together and get off of alcohol and drugs and go get a job. God knows there's plenty of them in Alabama right now. I don't know that using police and the power of the state to make him do that, or just make him get off our streets so we don't have to look at his poor butt anymore, is an appropriate use of state law enforcement and state, criminal code. But it's something the legislature is going to take a look at. I don't know where that bill goes. I got a bunch of questions on that. I have a short little synopsis there. The actual legislation is like 2 or 3 pages long.
Of course it is. So let's talk about House Bill 6. Is a parental rights bill sponsored by Pascal. It would provide that the government may not burden certain fundamental rights of parents unless the burden is narrowly tailored to a compelling state interest. The bill affirms that fit parents have a fundamental right to direct the education, upbringing, care, custody, and control of their children. So is this a pushback against DHR?
I don't know that it's necessarily just DHR. They've got deals where the little child says that, hey, Daddy, I'm a boy, but I want to be a girl. And Daddy says, not in my house. And then he goes down to the school, and the school lets him put a dress on and says, hey, he can change his gender down there at the school. He can do what he wants to here. The parents under this could then say, no. I'm in charge, you're not. There's a lot of push between the schools and parents. Anybody who's been to a school board meeting lately knows there's a number of parents who are concerned that the state of Alabama and the schools, as DHR, are taking away their rights to do what they want to do with their kids. Pascal, before he was elected to the legislature, was the president of the Alabama, I think it's the Family Rights Association. I may be getting that.
Yeah, I think I've read this bill before. Hadn't he tried to do this before?
Yeah, he's tried to bring this before, and he's tried to bring legislation requiring judges to give joint custody unless the judge can present a written presumption as to why,
mommy's not fit or daddy's not fit.
Yeah, I mean, well, in the case where there's two fit parents, instead of saying, well, I can't, both parents are fit, but I'm going to give this one 100% custody or give this one 90% custody. These are issues that are very important to Kenneth, who came out on the wrong end of a custody battle with his former wife.
I got you. Well, and the only other thing that I was thinking here was that when the state of Alabama, when DHR removes your children from your care, they have to have a hearing within 72 hours for the state to establish to the family court judge or the juvenile judge in your jurisdiction that the removal was necessary and in the best interest of the child. And, that seems like a narrowly tailored and compelling state interest in that instance.
And here it limits this to fit parents. So if DHR says, hey, you're a drug addict, you're a criminal, you're leaving the kid by you're abusing the child, then you're an unfit parent, and this doesn't even apply to you.
I got you. Well, Representative Ed Oliver has introduced a bill to ban the teaching of divisive concepts. That legislation is House Bill 7.
Last year, this was the anti-critical race theory bill. There were a major important law professor down at University of Alabama developed, along with other people, the critical race theory that, the white race, America was created to benefit the white race, and they've been the chosen race. And, our laws and institutions have all been set up by the white race to benefit white privilege. And, a lot of history has been written in recent years around that critical race theory. That's influenced things like the 1619 Project. Because, some children did not like having their race talked bad about in class, or especially in college, there was an effort to ban the teaching of critical race theory, not only in schools, but in like any state agency. Now, Oliver carried that bill last year. Now, that got compromised down to what we now call the ban on divisive concepts. And, they spell out specifically what divisive concepts are, and they're listed in the bill. That passed the House last year, and it came out of committee in the Senate, but Democrats were going to filibuster it, and Republicans kind of wanted to get out of there and didn't want to, spend 12 hours fighting over it. So it died in the Senate. Now, Oliver's bringing it back. I don't know if this is exactly worded like that final version of the his last year's bill, but it's pretty close, having read both.
All right. Well, House Bill 14, Representative Chris England would require the death penalty sentence can only be applied when there is a unanimous vote of the jurors to impose the death penalty. Presently, all it takes is a majority of the jurors, so I guess that's some death penalty reform. House Bill 12, also sponsored by England, would make it a Class A misdemeanor if a person carrying a concealed firearms fails to inform law enforcement upon request that he or she is in possession of a concealed pistol or firearm. This is already required under the law as set in the permitless carry bill that passed last year. This would, however, provide for penalties if the citizen failed to inform the law enforcement officer of the weapon when asked to do so.
This is kind of a tricky little deal here. If I have a gun on my possession,
It's none of your damn business, not even if you're a cop, unless you're about to take me into custody.
yeah, because
Period.
we have a database that tells them when they pull Brandon over, whether or not, a citizen is a prohibited person or not. If you've gone into that prohibited person's database, they know that you've been convicted before, or you've been, had a misdemeanor domestic violence charge, or under a personal protection order, from a strange spouse, or that you've been committed to an insane asylum. So they know you shouldn't have a weapon. Everybody else under our permitless carry bill that passed last year can have a weapon. Where this gets tricky is, I know I have a gun on my possession, but I was a concealed carry permit holder before the permitless carry passed. So many times, I want to say always, there's a handgun probably somewhere in my car because I have that concealed carry permit. I'm single, but many people are not. Let's say the wife jumps in the husband's car and goes down to get groceries. If that husband left that handgun in the glove box or under the seat, and the wife tells that officer, "No, officer, I do not have a gun on my possession in my car," and then for some reason, they search that car and find that gun, she's guilty if this becomes law. Well, she's guilty under the current deal, but this just makes that a misdemeanor.
Well, I have an interesting legal conundrum. So if you violate this law, have you then been convicted of a gun crime and you can't possess a firearm anymore? I guess I need to go read the whole thing.
Yeah, that's another question I have. Because you lied to that officer, or you did not properly disclose, in the case of, the wife that didn't know the husband's gun was in the car. Does that person then who gets convicted of this and has to pay that fine, do they now have a gun? Of course, it is a misdemeanor, not a felony. So I'm thinking, again, you got to read the statute. I'm thinking this would not prevent you would not lose your gun rights because you got this misdemeanor.
I sure hope.
But I mean, now you're in the court system and you're getting fined and you have to make an appearance. And, a lot of people, especially people of low income, they cannot hire attorneys to deal with all their little issues with the court system. Very routine little deals get to be expensive really quick. They've already pulled you over for speeding. Now they've got you for that and for not having, properly disclosing that your gun was in the car. And you've got a court hearing for that, and you didn't appear. And, next thing you know, you owe $1,500 or something to some court system someplace in some little town that's using their court system to make money.
And the Gulf Coast Fugitive Task Force comes in swinging in through your windows with M4s at 3 a.m.
Yeah, knowing you probably have a gun.
Right.
But you're a dangerous gun crime person.
So this is important, and this is something a lot of people don't know, Brandon. So I want you to explain a little bit more. The regular session will begin on Tuesday, March 7th. Governor Ivey will address a joint session of the legislature in the historic Alabama Capitol building that night, where she will deliver her State of the State address. Last year, she sounded like she was going to hack up a lung. Do you remember that one?
I was in that room, and, Kay was not having the greatest of days. She gave a good speech, but she really struggled through it. A lot of us, we had a January session then. A lot of us had something going around that month.
Well, the state constitution limits the Alabama regular session to a maximum of 30 legislative days. Typically, 1,200 bills will be introduced in that period of time. Most will never become law. So when they get started on March 7th, so typically Mondays and Fridays are out, right? Don't they have legislative calendaring like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
Yeah, normally, they don't like to do weekends. There's nothing saying the Speaker of the House, or the pro tem can't call them in on a Friday or a Saturday, or even in an extreme example on a Sunday. But normally they meet in session once the session begins on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They're in Montgomery for committee days. That's when you have most of the committees are crowded into, Wednesday. And a lot of times they'll double up, and they'll, the speaker or the pro tem will, have a Wednesday session, usually Wednesday night. And, we'll burn, in those weeks, we'll burn 3 legislative days a week. And, the normal weeks, it'll be 2. It doesn't take long to go through 30 legislative days.
And there were a bunch of rule changes that just came about that could potentially affect some of how these things get through or don't, especially local legislation. So, Brandon, you actually go to the Capitol, cover the legislature, go to these committee meetings and everything. And I think it'd be invaluable for our listeners if you'd commit to coming back and telling us what's going on during the session. So, Mr. Rip and I don't have to drive up there. So, anyway, one of the bills that got introduced last year that didn't go anywhere was establish a procedure to determine whether and to whom and what portion of a recording made by law enforcement may be disclosed or a copy released. Do you know if that's been reintroduced this year?
As of the moment, it's not. But again, most of the bills are yet to be filed. There's only 36 that were up as of the end of the close of the business day yesterday. Legislators, they make their, they don't have to be there till March 7th.
But I mean, do we have any? Do we have any more of these important bills coming down, like House Bill 332 that says that window tinting for current and retired federal, state, and law enforcement agents doesn't apply? They can have dark tint on their personal vehicles. I mean, these are the types of things that just seem, when we have all these real problems in Alabama and we spend time on something like this, it really chaps my ass, man.
Well, I mean, people complain, well, they're wasting time on this or they're wasting time on that. If you've ever actually sat through a session, a bill can move really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
If there's nobody that's really upset about something, hey, the committee says, okay, I'm introducing bill number 5, whatever that might be. Hey, we got the sponsor here. 5 is now on the table. Somebody on that committee can say, I make a motion, we give bill number 5 a favorable report.
And it goes out of committee.
Says, I second that. Unless someone there's got a problem, that committee can then vote bill number 5, clear it through the committee without discussing it.
Mm-hmm.
And, when it gets to the floor of the House or the Senate, they put it out there on the back end, on a non-controversial day where everybody just wants to go to dinner. Hey, we've got bill number 5 on the floor. Here's the sponsor. Sponsor, say a few words about what it's about. And BIR passes. We amend it. Everybody's in favor. I mean, people have an image of Republicans versus Democrats and long debates. And dirty little secret of the legislature is most decisions on bills are made when the caucuses meet. Obviously the Republican caucus controls everything. But, if it's if the Republican caucus has no objection and they're all satisfied with it the way it is, and the Democrat caucus is looked at and they're good with it, a bill can move really quick. All of a sudden, something has become a law, and someone like me that's in the room may never have heard any discussion about it.
That sounds about right. So I want to talk about some of these good old boy local bills that get passed. So I don't know if you know about this, but there was a constitutional a bill that put this measure on the ballot, and it was approved. It's a general law of local application, and it shall only apply to Baldwin County after May 13th, 2013. Any person qualifying for election to the office of sheriff in the county or any person appointed to serve as sheriff shall meet all of the minimum requirements in addition to any other qualifications required by law. So right now, we have 67 counties in Alabama. In the other, well, there may be Jefferson County may have this requirement too. But is Bobby Timmons still alive, the fat man at the Sheriff's Association?
He has retired. Last session was his last time. We named his, Alabama Sheriff's Association building after him, and he got his watch, and he's now done.
This has got his fingerprints all over it. And the person has to be a citizen. The person has to be a resident of the county. The person has qualified of an elector pursuant to state and federal law, and the person has been registered to vote in the county for at least a year prior to qualifying. The person shall have a high school diploma or GED. The person must be 25 years of age. The person has 3 or more years of prior service as a law enforcement officer. Well, think about all the people that excludes.
Yeah. Obviously, law enforcement, if you're a member of law enforcement, you would prefer that the sheriff in your county be a member of law enforcement.
But that's a question for the voters. This is protectionist for our current sheriff. That's all this is.
And they have that kind of thing will slip in the local bill where, hey, only a member of law enforcement can be the sheriff. Now, where you see this more often is with attorneys. There's a bunch of local bills that pass that says, hey, if you want to be, I'm not going to name a county because I'll get it wrong. But, I've seen this happen several times where in this county, under this local bill, from now on, only an attorney can be the probate judge. And if you're an attorney, obviously you'd rather deal with another attorney as your probate judge that you deal with. Rather than one more time, man, that's a decision that the voters can make. It need not be a qualification. If there's somebody out there who everybody knows is a good businessman, been at the bank for 25 years, and is a solid citizen, I don't think that there's anything. I don't see any reason that person wouldn't be a good probate judge. But under Alabama law, we have a representative democracy, not a democracy.
That's true.
So, you empower the state legislature to make these decisions for you. And, a bunch of them say, well, I just think only law enforcement should be the sheriff. I think only attorneys should be probate judges. And then since they know they'll run into trouble if they try to pass something like that as a statewide bill, because, obviously across the state, there are non-attorneys who are probate judges, and there's non-law enforcement people that are sheriffs or want to be sheriffs. So what they do is they say, well, Baldwin County legislative delegation, does anybody in the Baldwin County legislative delegation object to this bill? No. And so
of course not.
If there's no objection among the members of that county's local delegation, it goes to the floor of the legislature, and nobody wants to jerk with another county's local bill because you just made enemies of the guys in that county, even if they're in your own party, and they're going to mess with your local bills. So everybody so a lot of these things will pass at like 15 to nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
or less than that.
Like I said, I think it's protectionist, and I think it was done for the benefit of one person, and that's our current sheriff, and has made sure that he didn't have any competition.
Well, that, and the next sheriff will be a member of law enforcement. It'll be a police chief or a deputy or a former FBI agent or something. Those are the only people that can run.
So, Brandon, one more issue, and I'm going to let you run. Attorney General seeks to block Alabama prison inmates to be set free. Our sheriff came out and said that there's 5 coming to Baldwin County, and they're real dangerous, and some of them are murderers and all this. And here's a little map of, what was it, 200 or so that were going to be released, 170, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was like 90 on the first week, and I think we were all the way up to like 170. The last number I saw was that there's 430 of these guys in the pipeline.
Right.
There's been a lot of hysteria about this.
I agree.
A lot of people that voted for this and did not have any objection to it at all in committee or in the floor of the Senate or the floor of the House are now grandstanding.
Sure. Our grandstander in chief, the tax man Chris Elliott, has proposed a bill to delay the supervised release of inmates until 2030.
I don't
Most of them will be dead by then.
I don't remember the debate on this bill at the time, but he could have got on the floor of the state Senate when it passed, in 2021 and filibustered it, and probably got that added to it then. But see, what we have is we've got a bigger problem in the state.
So do you think this was done intentionally to kill all prison reform and sentencing reform? That's what I think. I think they set this domino up and knocked it over.
Nobody will come out and admit that. But, we've got a bigger problem in the state, and that, Jeff Sessions investigated the Alabama Department of Corrections, the prisons. He ordered,
when Jeff he was Sessions, Attorney General, or when he was
Attorney General.
Okay.
Ordered, and he inherited this from the Obama administration, but it was the Session investigation, and they went in there and interviewed, current inmates, former inmates, corrections officers, former corrections officers. They looked at the number of dead inmates that we have, the felonies that we have committed against inmates by fellow inmates and corrections officers and against correction officers and whatnot, and they found that this is the Trump administration, found that serving a sentence in the Alabama Department of Corrections is a cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment.
All right, so let's break this down for a second for people. You're a damn hog farmer, right?
I did, I have an animal and dairy science degree, and I did work in that industry.
Do you carry a pocket knife?
Yes.
Yes. I think you and I fit a certain profile of Southern male psyche, and let's just get this out of the way. I don't think the death penalty is used enough. And while I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for people who break the law, even though given my profession, your sentence to a prison somewhere should not be a sentence to a torture chamber of rape, violence, murder, drugs. Can you think of anything worse than going to prison? Maybe Mexico or, a gulag in Russia. But my goodness, man, the conditions in Alabama prisons are shameful. Not deplorable, shameful.
we watch prison movies, and they got like two guys in a cell, and they're locked up, and they get on the exercise yard, all kinds of stuff happens. That's not Alabama. That's other places. Well, we have most of our prisons are barrack style, where there's somewhere between, there's like 120 beds in a
metal building.
Yeah, in a barracks that was designed for 80.
And people sleeping in Tupperware.
Check on them. If they're making too much noise, he may or may not walk in there. What we've got is we're overcrowded. We're about 160% capacity. Our prisons were designed before most of us were alive. And, they reflect 1930s and 1940s opinions on criminal justice, which doesn't necessarily reflect the modern view. And we haven't maintained them well. And the conditions are horrific. I mean, we were ordered by a federal judge to hire 2,000 more corrections officers because we didn't have enough officers to protect the public and protect the inmates from each other. And 3 years we've been trying, and we actually have less. The latest report that came out by the AP or a couple of weeks ago was that at the end of the year, we had less officers working corrections than we had when we received that order and promised to fix the problem 3 years ago. What we're facing, if we don't fix these problems, is a federal judge saying, hey, we agree with Jeff Sessions and the Trump administration that serving a sentence in the Alabama Department of Corrections where you don't get fed well, you're not clothed well, there's not basic healthcare services, that amounts to an unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual punishment. Then a federal judge steps in there and says, hey, I'm now in charge of this puppy, and you will, hey, you're at 160% capacity. Boom. In 60 days, you're going to be 100% capacity because you're going to release 60% out. And we've got this image in our society of that poor little college kid that's pulled over with 2 joints who gets a 10-year sentence for marijuana possession. Nothing could be further than the truth.
Right. From
the truth in Alabama. Over 90% of them are violent. They're in there for violent things. We're talking about, murderers are being let out. These were all people that were going to be out anyway. They're going to be out within a year. All that 2021 law did was come in and say, hey, if you're within 6 months of your end of sentence, that means they didn't give you parole. The parole bureau thought you were too dangerous to let out on parole, but we're going to let you out anyway because your sentence is up. That last 6 months, you go to like a halfway house where they try to keep you clean and feed you and, get you employed and, get you have a driver's license and finish your GED or whatever before we turn you loose. Well, what happens is these dudes are dangerous as all get out. They came from the wrong side of town.
And they probably picked up some new skills while totally unsupervised in the prison.
I mean, they were bad, violent dudes to get in there. And they just spent 20 years or more with really bad, violent dudes. And they have survived that. And now you're going to turn them loose without a high school diploma, without any job skills, without any money, without a driver's license. And, a lot of them are tatted up. They ain't in the greatest of health. I mean, they're dudes you take one look at and say, I'm not hiring that dude.
Right.
And if you lease them without any kind of, halfway deal, this doesn't apply to sex offenders. In a sentence, if you're a child rapist, child sex offenders.
You have to do the whole SORNA thing and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. if you're, just a routine gangbanger murderer dude, when your sentence is up, this rule says that you go to some sort of supervised release before your end of sentence. But see, what I think that bill was not the problem. What they were scared of was the Ivey administration about 4 years ago had a whole bunch of sentencing reform and justice reform suggestions. Our attorney general and our district attorneys have in many cases opposed implementation of that package. I think by raising heck on end of sentence, which nobody found objectionable in 2021 when we were debating this, I think this was a firing salvo at that bigger justice reform, sentencing reform package that was expected. And I'm not hearing any word about justice reform and sentencing reform. I mean, only like 10% of inmates are even eligible for good time. We've already got pre-filed legislation, to decrease that further.
Well, I still say it was all by design to make sure that none of this ever happened, and I don't see the upside. I mean, does Chris Elliott think he's no longer going to be, is he going to be in the federal government by then? I mean, why would anybody think this is any kind of a solution? The supervised early release was a solution.
Yeah, law enforcement, if they had their way, they would send them to the Alabama Department of Corrections, and they, for the most part, they would never see them again because, I mean, again, these are bad dudes, and a bunch of them, when they get out, they're going to do bad things, and our sheriffs and our law enforcement knows that. So they actively oppose anything that lets anybody out. Our problem is we never spent enough money to properly house our inmates. We can't hire anybody who wants to spend 12, 14 hours a day locked up with these people, making sure they don't kill each other. And we're overcrowded. I mean, I listed some of the legislation that's already been pre-filed. We're creating new crimes that don't already exist.
So I went to Holman Prison 2 weeks ago. Do you know how much of Holman Prison is being utilized right now?
I think, maybe a quarter?
A quarter. The other 3/4 of it has been condemned.
Yeah.
Like unsafe for human habitation. That is crazy to me.
Yeah, and when Alabama says it's condemned, it was bad.
Well, Brandon, I certainly appreciate your time. The other thing that I would say that is a backdrop to all of this is that we are having a gun violence flare-up down here in Mobile County for dang sure. There were 6 shootings over last weekend, 9 victims. Go back to the moon pie drop, New Year's Eve. There was a cop every 15 feet, and there was a gangland shootout. 1 dead, 9 hurt.
I covered the moon pie drop back when, I think Sam Jones was the mayor. I went out there and, I was going to Mobile. I brought my mother, who was still alive then, with me. And we were there. We were watching the moon pie drop, and all of a sudden gunshots rang out. This was about 10 years ago. So terrorism was all on everyone's mind. I thought we had a mass shooter out there, gunning down people in the crowd. So I threw Mother down on the ground and jumped up under a park bench and started looking for the shooter because I wasn't going to turn my back to a mass shooter.
Right.
Now it turned out it was just a hoodlum, native little Mobile hoodlum who happened to see another one of his fellow Mobile native hoodlums in front of him at the moon pie, watching the moon pie drop, and decided this was a good time to put 3 rounds in his back. But
you gotta love Mobile.
yeah, these, I've got an article out today at AL Today where Alabama has the 4th highest rate of gun deaths in the country. Mississippi's number 1.
Well, that's just those are cleaning accidents. Those people over in Mississippi.
Well, it combines our murders with our suicides. We like to, when we commit suicide, instead of peacefully going with some kind of drugs. In Alabama, we prefer to kill ourselves.
We don't have many high bridges in Alabama. You got to kind of
we don't jump
off
bridges. We want to just
no tall buildings either, really.
Then we have people that go out in the woods and mistake their cousin, hunting buddy for a deer. And so they just open up. They see some branches move and they just unload.
True. So Mobile and Birmingham police chiefs blast studies showing cities most violent in the nation. Did you see this? It was
I saw that
or whatever. And turns out, man, I wouldn't have thought St. Louis, Missouri, but
I interviewed a former Birmingham officer. I didn't get him on the record, but off the record this summer. And he said it was so bad, he had just quit, that someone would get shot, they would rush to the scene, and they would be interviewing the witnesses and, trying to get people to talk. And, in a dangerous side of one of the most dangerous towns in America, getting people to talk is difficult. And then they would get a call from dispatch telling them, hey, drop what you're doing and drive 6 blocks away. There's been another shooting.
Yeah, I saw something where they were having there were 3 shootings in one day, and one of them was, the guy was just hamburger meat, and the shift sergeant said that all his guys were going to seek psychiatric intervention because of all the things that they'd seen that day. And I mean,
the summer in Birmingham was just,
oh yeah,
I mean, it was unimaginable. They had like 100 murders by like early August.
Yeah. Well, that ain't nothing new for Birmingham. So let's talk real quick. The 5 officers charged with murder in Memphis police killing of Tyree Nichols, and to his credit, the Lagniappe pointed out that hold on one second. The Lagniappe pointed out that this video would have never been seen in Alabama.
It probably wouldn't have. These departments, they're all terrified of, lawsuits. And, I mean, they're not giving up the body cam footage. They'll use it to their advantage if it gets them out of a situation. But if it might in any way help a plaintiff's attorney, they're not putting that out there if they can avoid it.
So back in August, in my hometown, Bay Minette, Alabama, body cam footage of fatal officer involved shooting in Bay Minette, that has not been released. I want to say that he was killed August 22nd after, and I'm talking about Otis French Jr., after being pulled over at 10:30 on a Saturday morning for having a tail light out, and he ends up losing his life. The other hilarity of this whole thing is that it's being investigated by the Baldwin County Major Crimes Unit, and the chief of police in Bay Minette, Al Talbert, is the chairman of that Major Crimes Unit. I mean, do you see how this is so incestuous you can't believe it? And more importantly, what's today? February 17th. So August 22nd to February 17th, we still don't know the name of the officer who pulled the trigger. Can you imagine another state in the union where they didn't even have to disclose that?
One reform that the state might want to consider, I don't think anyone has introduced this legislation, is, when there's an officer involved shooting, make the Alabama Bureau of Investigation the lead agency.
Well, doesn't
Under
that sound
current law that the local authorities are able to ask ABI whether they come in and help with a case or not. In a lot of places of the state, they would have called ABI instantly, and this would have been an ABI case, and ABI would have then either cleared the officer or, recommended, some sort of discipline. The way they did it in Baldwin County with the French shooting is they just turn it over to major crimes in Baldwin County. And again, there's people with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Department and the city of Bay Minette work together a lot. I mean, the jail is right there in Bay Minette for Baldwin County. Asking brother officers to investigate brother officers is understandably difficult.
And why would you put one of your fellow law enforcement officers in that position?
To me, a good reform would be just say ABI as this is now your issue.
That would make a whole lot of sense.
But again, that would have to come from the legislature.
True. So, are you familiar with our Deal with the Devil project, the wrongful conviction of Bubba Murray Lawrence Jr.?
Only loosely.
Well, we'll get into Mr. Rip. That's his little pet project, and obviously a client of mine, and we're going to be pouring some time into that. Now, you see here our district attorney, the former U.S. Senator and Attorney General, then our mayor, subject of our discussion about ethics here. So you see the chief of police here. He talk about incestuous. He came from the sheriff's department. He was a sheriff's deputy for about a decade under Hoss Mack, and somehow he rises from the mediocre position of corporal at the sheriff's department to be the chief of police in Bay Minette.
But if you were hiring a local police chief, you don't want to hire somebody off the streets. You want to hire somebody from law enforcement. If you're not prepared to promote from within your department, and if you're making a change, there might be a question with doing that, then you're looking at other law enforcement agencies, and if there's nobody at ABI or FBI wants to take a pay cut to do it, but it's Mobile County or Baldwin County Sheriff's Departments.
Right. Well, what's the next thing you got on your agenda? What's the next big? I know the March is the beginning of the session, and the governor's State of the State address. What do you have your eyeballs on between now and then?
Oh, now next week's going to be interesting. We're going to have the first committee meeting of the committees can meet before the session.
Okay.
Committee can meet anytime during the year. It doesn't cost them a legislative day. The American Rescue Plan Act Oversight Committee is going to meet in Montgomery, and they're going to consider how we're going to spend that $1.2 billion that we just got from the federal government to fight COVID.
Well,
That's coming up Tuesday, and then the budget committee start meeting about how we're going to spend, the $2 billion or so in surplus money we got from last year that we didn't spend.
All right. Well, if you will, we'll look forward to seeing you next Friday, and would direct everybody to Alabama Today, and that's where you're writing now, right?
ALtoday.com.
AL Today, and here's the ALtoday.com's Twitter page, and you can see all of the goings on there or at their .com site.
And we're on Facebook.
All right, Mr. Mosley. Well, I certainly appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, Harry. See you next week.